In this video, I'm going to be sharing 10 tips that will help you lay out your shop in a more efficient manner. Now, this video is going to be full of a bunch of wide shots because I really want to give you a good visual of my space that I have. And before we get into the first thing that I want to discuss is I just want to say that I am not a professional or an expert when it comes to efficiency of a shop. It's very personal. Everybody's shop is going to be a little bit different. However, I would say that the advantage that I have is because I spent 20 years in the military and I moved a lot, and during that time I moved the shop multiple times. I've had an opportunity to set up multiple different shops in a very short amount of time, which is typically something that a lot of people don't experience. And I've also had the luxury of switching out tools. So one of the things I'll talk about in this video is the sliding table saw in my space and how that correlates to having a better understanding of shop layout. So let's go ahead and get into the very first suggestion and recommendation that I have. My shop is a 20 foot deep, 30 foot wide space. This is the single car garage door, and then I have a double garage door, which we'll talk about when we get to that point. However, you'll notice that all of my lumber is being stored directly next to that operating garage door. So that's my first recommendation, is when you're thinking about your shop layout, think of it in terms of material coming in and material coming out. That should be the very first thing that you're taking into consideration when it comes to a shop, because what you don't want is you don't want to be downloading lumber and then having to maneuver around a bunch of tools in order to download that lumber. It makes that process longer, and it makes the process of processing that lumber longer because it may not be in an efficient space. So just think, when I back up to my garage or I back up to my shop, where am I going to put it? What's the greatest location for me to have a nice smooth transition? And then from that location, how is that going to affect the rest of my shop? Now, number 2 is to work with any obstructions that you already have in your space. Don't create another obstruction. Try to work with the obstructions that you have. And I've seen this in way too many people's shops, and this is the first shop that I have had an obstruction like this, and that is this metal support pole that is, helping hold my ceiling up. So this is kind of important, and while I probably could have had an engineer come in here and do some fancy stuff and spend a bunch of money and get that thing removed, it was actually just a lot easier to try to lay out my space in conjunction with that. So my shop has changed since I moved in here slightly. Just the big tools, right? None of the small stuff has really changed yet. But when I came and looked at this house and we purchased it, one of the things I was looking at when I came out into the garage was, what are my obstructions? Where's the door? Where are the garage doors? What are the measurements for those? And then we have this pole. So instead of me having this pole and another location where the dust collection drop would end up, I actually just utilized the pole to do my dust collection drop. Therefore, I'm taking advantage of that. So I don't lose that space. It does, however, force me to put certain things in this area because I want to have the dust collection there. So it's a give and take, right? So this right here was the biggest obstruction. I figured out if I can put major stationary tools around it, I can drop my dust collection down there. And now I'm not losing 2 places, being the pole and also where I was going to drop the dust collection for the tools in another location. So when you're looking at a new space or you're looking at your existing space, start with the obstructions and figure out how you can work around those. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. I spent the last 20 years in the Army as an infantryman. I've deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, I've spent countless nights away from my loved ones, and I've lost people that were close to me. Now, all of that really begins to take a toll on someone's mental health, myself included. If it wasn't for me seeking out a therapist for help, I honestly don't know where I would be today. If I would have known about BetterHelp then, I would have gotten help sooner. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to give you helpful, unbiased advice. All you need to do is go to their site, betterhelp.com/bentswoodworking, and answer a few questions. And then BetterHelp will match you with a professional who has years of experience helping people who have struggles just like you. And you can do all of this from either your phone or your computer, whether it's a phone call, video chat, or messaging, whatever is the most comfortable for you. It's the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist, all from the comfort of your own home. Just visit betterhelp.com/bentswoodworking or choose Bent's Woodworking during your sign up, and you'll enjoy a discount on your first month. There's one thing that I will never regret, and that is seeking out somebody to talk to. It made me a better person, a better father, a better husband, and for that, I am grateful. Now, this one I think people are going to have the hardest time with. And what it is don't only think in 90 degrees, right? Don't only think that everything has to be a perfect 90. And I know that this does not work with a lot of people's brains. I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I was the same way when I first started thinking about it. But it is really amazing what can happen if you turn something at a 45. So what you're looking at right here is my sliding table saw and my bandsaw. And of course, we have the obstruction being the pole that's right there. By turning this 45 degrees, not only did it give me more in-feed and out-feed support, but it actually opened up this area here, which is another consideration that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But think of this if this was turned at 90, which is what most people would do, perfectly parallel with walls and everything else. My in-feed support would be capped because of my assembly table, or my length, right? And again, this is a slider. This slider comes all the way back to here. Because I turned that, I actually have a lot more support coming back this way as opposed to if I turned it this way. Same thing applies as I'm going through this direction. Interesting story. Before I got the sliding table saw, I always thought, look, I'm in a 3-car garage, like a lot of people, 2-car, 3-car, 1-car. 1-car garages are a lot more challenging because, it's not really about efficiency and workflow because everything is so close together. But when you get to a 2, 3, 4-car garage, you can really maximize the space. And a way to do that is to position things at an angle. And when I went to Felder and talked to them about this, they actually told me that 9 times out of 10, the thing that ends up putting people over the edge when thinking about getting a sliding table saw is actually turning the table saw to 45. And what that does is it just opens up so many more opportunities. Now let's flip over to the bandsaw and how it relates to that. If I line my bandsaw with the table saw in the space that I'm not using, it allows that walkway on the back side of that pole there, as opposed to if I had to put it next to the pole at a perfect 90, I would have no walkway over there. So this has now given me longer in-feed, longer out-feed, and still provides me with a walkway around those tools. Now, I wanted to flip you around to this side because the next thing I want to talk about is clustering tools. You'll notice I have my table saw and my bandsaw together. Now, why did I do that? Well, if I would have put this up near that post, I would have lost the ability to do that. But by backing it off just a little bit, this area that is completely useless, now it's not useless because I have another tool here that I can use next to it. So anytime you have an opportunity to cluster tools, I would absolutely recommend that. And if I had more space between the pole and the wall, I would actually probably be putting my router table there because then it would be in a location where I don't have to move it in order to use it. The next thing I want to highlight is making sure that you're keeping walkways open and available and that you have some sort of area in your space where you could stage things if you need to. And again, all of the things that we've already talked about kind of lead to this point. So you will see that I have a huge walkway here, even with the outrigger table on my sliding table saw. Now, the benefit to this is that if it was ever in the way, I could simply move it and now I have more space. But one of the things when I got this was, I'll just take the outrigger table off when I don't need it because it'll get in the way. Well, guess what? Turning it 45 degrees made it to where it never gets in the way of anything that I do. I have ample space all back here, right? I have more than enough space over here. In-feed and out-feed of my joiner planer combo is completely clear. I can move my materials. You'll notice here I have all of my plywood and everything stored up against the wall next to all the different hardwoods and stuff that I have. And so from here, I'm able to just take these sheets, turn them, put them on the table saw, process them, move them over to my assembly table. But if I needed to bring a full sheet over to my assembly table, this is where it's key, I wouldn't be running into things because I kept this open space in mind. Now, I know what some of you guys might be thinking already at this point in the video, and that is, yeah, that's great, but I don't have that much space. I get it. right? You don't have a 3-car garage. Maybe you have a 2-car garage. Maybe you have a 1-car garage. It doesn't matter. All things are exactly the same in those spaces as long as you plan for them. It's just that your walkway may not be as big, right? You may have a smaller walkway, but you have the walkway. So let me show you some other areas where that would be very similar. Now, this is where I spend the majority of my time, being at the assembly table or the miter saw station. And you'll notice here, this is my most narrow walkway, and I've got 40 inches, which is a minimum that I usually try to have between things, right? So if I'm working here, I can turn around and I don't have to take a bunch of steps to go from one to the other. I don't need a ton of space in this location. Over here, at the end of my table, I have even more. I have 50 inches. Over on that side, I have about the same, 50 inches to the next obstruction. Obstruction could be, it doesn't have to be a wall, the obstruction could be a built-in cabinet system, your dust collector, whatever it is. Keep the walkways in mind when you're doing stuff, and just know that you don't need necessarily as much space as you think you do. The benefit to having a big open space like I just showed you is the obvious fact that if I needed to stage things somewhere, I have a location to do that where they're out of the way and it doesn't affect my work otherwise. Now, that's where having something like a 1-car garage might be a little bit more challenging, and you just have to work around that and figure out a solution that works for you. Maybe if you're building a bank of cabinets, when you build a cabinet, it doesn't stay in your shop, it actually goes inside to a staging area. So again, things to think about. Now, this next one is probably the most common thing that I see people make, right? So one of the biggest challenges with redesigning a shop or changing the efficiency or changing the layout is the fact that you have to move things, which is where something like SketchUp comes in handy. Or you just go in your shop and you move a bunch of stuff around and you figure out what works. The problem with that is if you do that hard labor and you decide you don't like it, guess what you're doing? You're moving it right back. So the biggest mistake that I see people make is they go, okay, today's the day, I'm getting my bandsaw. And they look around their shop like this and they go, okay, that's the open space that I have, that's where the bandsaw's going. That is the absolute wrong thing to do, because now you're thinking in the sense of, you know, I have a open space, I need to fill it, instead of I have a tool, where is it going to benefit me the most? And the reason why I think people do that is because the place that it might benefit you the most might require you to move a bunch of things around, and you just don't want to do that. So if you think of the bandsaw, and then you do the same thing for a drill press, and you do the same thing for a CNC machine, and you do the same thing for your jointer and your planer and all these other things, before you know it, you have all of these things in random places, and you are now no longer efficient because I'm milling lumber on one side of the shop, I'm assembling it on the other side of the shop, I'm sanding it in another location on the shop, and that just isn't smart, right? Think about the process of that you're going through to build a piece of furniture and place tools accordingly based on what is going to help you with your workflow, not filling a space just because you have it open, right? Like, oh, I've got this space open right here. This is a perfect location for whatever. No, it's not. It's a terrible location. Why? Because the bandsaw's right there and I don't have a lot of space behind it, right? So really think about that before you actually get a new tool in your shop so you can make whatever adjustments you need to make prior to the tool actually showing up. Now, this next one is, it can be very helpful, but this is where if you're in a really small space, it doesn't matter as much, right? Like the way that I would tell somebody to lay out a 1-car garage, it would be a little bit different in the sense that in that situation, it helps to have everything mobile, right? But what I'm about to say kind of negates that if you have an open space, and that would be, don't place things in locations that will make it difficult to use. And what I mean by that is if you have to move something in order to use it, it's very likely that you're probably not going to use that item. You're going to find another way to do it, which in some cases could lead to a more unsafe way of doing it, and nobody wants that at the end of the day. So my recommendation is always try to put your tools in a location to where 90% of the work that you do requires you no movement of that tool. Now again, that's not always a possibility, and in my shop, this is a perfect example. This is my router table, and as you can see, it has a bunch of boxes and crap on it. And the reason for that is because I don't use it, and it turns out to be a storage for other things. So two things are happening here. Not only because I have the Incra router table, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a moment, but I push things through this way, and I have to have space to the side of here because this comes out. So for storage, it makes sense to put this over here because it doesn't inhibit my walkway. This is not being used for anything. And if I needed to pull it out and use it, I could pull it out and use it here. I could pull it out and use it over here. So the space that it sits presently is not the problem, other than the fact that the only time I can use it is if it's a piece shorter than 12 to 15 inches. Otherwise, it'll hit the wall. So I have to move it for 90% of the things that I actually do for it. So it's the complete opposite of what I would like. Now, again, you're not always going to be able to do this. There are going to be a couple of tools in your space, more than likely, even if you have a good amount of space, that doesn't have a permanent location. And that is fine. However, for me, the solution that I'm going to take to fix this problem is I'm going to get rid of this because I want to switch back to a more traditional style table where I'm pushing things through this way. And when that happens, this is now a permanent location which would handle 90% of the things that I need to do without moving the router table. Now, if there's ever an instance in that 10% that I need to move it, I absolutely can. It will be mobile. But that solves that problem. And it will actually probably take up a slightly smaller footprint at the end of the day. Now, the other thing that's happening is because I don't use it, I typically store a bunch of stuff on it. And that is now another reason why I will avoid using that and try it another way, just so I don't have to move everything that's on the table to another table, which then when I'm done using that, I have to move that stuff back. So the benefit to having things in permanent locations is that you will use them more often. Therefore, you will not clutter them like this. Now, this next one I've got you zoomed way out because what I want you to see is everything that's up here, right? So I like to refer to that as dead space. When I'm talking about dead space, I'm referring to locations that would be challenging to get anything from, therefore it's probably not the best place to store things, or it is the location where you store the thing that you might use once a year. So in my shop, what you'll see is I've got this Omni wall right here that organizes my tools, and this right here is about as high as I can go without it being uncomfortable or me needing to get a step ladder or climb up on something. So why go any higher than that with any kind of storage? Above it, you'll see all of my military pictures and all of that stuff, right? Because this is my shop. I like to come out here. I like to see those things. It was part of my past, and I just want to enjoy the space. Well, it makes sense to put that stuff in a location where I know I'm not going to use for storage of lumber, for storage of tools, whatever the case is. Another mistake that I see a lot of people make is that they litter their walls with all kinds of stuff, and because that stuff is there, they're doing the same thing with anything that they need to add that they would if they got a new tool and they're just trying to find an open location. So I don't know if it's something that is in our heads where it's like I'm looking at that space and it's like, okay, something is there, I can't put something there. You can just move it, right? So let me give you another example of what I'm talking about. So what you see behind me is a wall that's completely blank, right? And the reason that that wall is completely blank, minus this dry erase board, which I don't even know why I still have it in here, I never use it, is because I was like, well, why don't I could just put all of my pictures over there? Or I could leave that space open for in the event that one day maybe I want to add some more lumber storage there, right? Now, one thing that's nice is that currently I have some plans that I'm working on that are going to be me building a new miter saw station. For some of the reasons why we're talking about in this video. And that'll be a whole nother video when I do that. With that, I will probably relocate a lot of that stuff over to this wall because now I've been in here long enough to know that me and my shop, I don't need more lumber storage space. So now I might utilize that section right there just to be my wall where I can put my pictures and things like that. So having that open gives me a lot of abilities to, I wanted to add more lumber racks. I thought that that's what I was going to do. I'm going to add a bunch more lumber racks. I'm going to leave that open. But I don't really need it, right? So now I have an open space, but I always kept that in mind. Like I could put these pictures in places where it would never affect me, as opposed to if I put them over there and I ever did decide to add lumber racks, then I would have had to take them all down, put the lumber racks and find a new location for them. So when you're laying out your shop, place all your main tools first, and then the other, extra things that you just like to have in your space, start filling those things in areas where they make sense. And real quick, just because we're talking about utilizing that space, so behind me what you see is I actually built a wall in front of my 2-car garage door, which is another thing that I would recommend. I'm not going to talk about it in this video, but essentially at the end of the day, I don't need to use that 2-car garage door, so guess what I did? I gave myself a whole nother wall in my shop, giving me a whole bunch more storage, and it's great. I will talk a little bit more about that on the next one, but I want you to look above. I'm not going to store anything up there, right? So that's where I can put extra things that I don't really need, extra tools, extra tracks. I can put the pictures, banners, that kind of stuff that I want to have out in the shop just to make it a more enjoyable place for me. Again, utilizing that space. It's not somewhere where I would want to store lumber because I don't want to get a step stool in order to go get the lumber. Now, for this one, you're going to be way far away. I want you to see what I'm about to talk about. And that is, in my opinion, doesn't matter, again, unless you have a 1-car garage, maybe it's a little bit different, right? Because you're going to have all your things in the close proximity. 75% of my shop is in 1/3 of my shop. And you can see it right now. If I was to flip the camera around and show you the other side, it's a lot more open. There's a lot less clutter. There's a lot less things on the wall. 75% of my tools and 75% of everything in my shop is in the first third. Now, why is that? This goes back to what I was talking about with putting things in locations just because they're available and they're open versus putting them where they need to be. It makes no sense for me to have these tools or the sustainers or something like that on the other side of the shop. It makes no sense for me to have my vacuum on the other side of the shop. Everything that I do, 75% of what I do, is done at this table or very close to this table. So this should be where everything that I need to use at that table is. So that's something that you really need to consider is, yes, this area may be cluttered. Yes, this area may have a lot of things, but this is where I spend all of my time. So 75% of my stuff is right here, ready for me to use within a couple of steps. Again, what I'm trying to avoid is what I'm doing right now, which is walking all the way around my assembly table, all the way to the other side of the shop, just so I can get something. Everything is right there. It's all there, ready to be used, and I don't have to worry about finding things. Now, there are going to be certain instances where you have to have something on the other side of the shop. But think of it like this. Whatever you use most often, try to have those things nearby. If there is something that you have and the only storage location you have for it is the other side of the shop, make sure it's an item that you only use like once a month maybe, or once every 6 months, or maybe it's something that you almost never use but you do want to keep on hand. Utilize whatever space you have to store it. And that would be another example of where I would take advantage of dead space, right? If I had a tool that I wanted to keep just in case I ever needed it, I'd put it somewhere where it would never be in the way, and even if it was a pain to get to, well, I only have to get to it when I need it. Now, normally I would say that the last one I was telling you about, where 75% of my shop is in 1/3 of my shop, is the most important, right? I've come to realize that what I'm about to say is actually more important, and that is get rid of the things that you don't need. That is what I'm doing right now. I am going through realizing, okay, I don't need this, I'm going to get rid of it. Go through your drawers. If you find things in your drawers that you have not used for 1-2 years, or guess what, you forgot you even bought, get rid of it. Give it to another woodworker, sell it, throw it in the trash, make the space. If you don't use it, get rid of it. One of the best things that I did was get rid of my CNC machine. I had a 2 by 4 foot Axiom CNC, great CNC. The problem was I didn't use it the way that I thought, but I always kept it thinking that I would eventually get into that. I realized I don't want to be in the production game, so I sold it and I bought a Shaper Origin, and it takes up a lot smaller space. The result of that was I was able to put a sliding table saw in my shop with no problems. So there are positive side effects to getting rid of tools. The next thing I would say is that, especially very early on, everybody has this misconception that as a woodworker, you must have these tools. And if you don't have them, you're not a real woodworker, right? I have to have a bandsaw. I have to have a drill press. I'm getting rid of my drill press. I have to have a router table. I'm gonna get rid of that router table. So just because you're a woodworker doesn't mean you need to have certain tools. Do they help you? Yes, of course. But if you're somebody that only builds cutting boards, the tools that you need in your shop are far different from the guy that's building cabinets. It's far different from the guy that's building Sam Maloof rockers, right? You don't need every tool in your space just because you're a woodworker. So take a hard look, figure out what you need, what you're actually using, get rid of some things, maybe add some things that may make a difference. But at the end of the day, don't just continue to hoard stuff in the hopes that one day you might use it. If I'm being honest, one of the most freeing things that I have had happen to me in the past 2 years was feeling like I can let things go. I don't need to keep all of this extra scrap wood that I might use in 10 years. I don't need to keep this drum sander that I only use every once in a while, and when I do use it, it drives me nuts. I don't need to keep the CNC machine. I don't need to keep the drill press. Take a hard look, figure out what it is that you can do without, and get rid of it. Now, if you've made it to this point in the video, 1, thank you, and 2, it proves to me that you're getting some sort of value out of the things that I'm talking about. So if you would like to dive deeper in this with me one-on-one, I'm very happy to announce that I am finally, on a very limited basis each month, going to be offering services where I can help you redesign your space or help you lay out a potential new space. Now, the way that I do this is through SketchUp, and is utilizing the tools that you currently own or the tools that you plan on buying, and we can get as detailed as electrical locations, ductwork layout, and even lighting packages if you want. One of the things that this is going to include is multiple Zoom calls over that month to discuss different variations of layouts that I've come up with until we finally figure out something that works for you. Now, this is a very labor-intensive and time-intensive process, and I will say that I have priced it accordingly. So with that being said, if it's something that interests you, be sure to go to bentswoodworking.com. There is a questionnaire there that will allow me to get a better idea of what it is that you want and to find out if we would be a good fit for each other. And I will throw one more little opportunity out there for everybody, is this year I'm getting a lot more into Patreon. And one of the things that I'm offering twice a year, once in the summer and once in the winter, is I will randomly draw one of my top tier patrons, and I, at my own expense, will fly out to your shop, US only, and I will spend an entire day with you where we can do exactly what I was just talking about. We can go over some tool stuff, I can help you build something, or we can just hang out, whatever it is that you want to do. But that is an option, so if you're interested in that, I will put a link down in the video description to patreon.com/bentswoodworking, and enter for your chance to win there as well. That's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.